Hello and welcome to the 12th in my CPD Coffee Time sessions. Today we're going to focus on reflective practice and the importance of developing our ability to reflect upon our work, the way in which we engage with our children that we look after and nurture, and how to use reflection as a means to ensure that we develop effectively as professionals. Hopefully, if you've been listening to these sessions on an ongoing basis, you'll know a little bit about me. But just to summarise for those of you who haven't, and this might be your first CPD session with me, I'm a psychologist by trade and I'm also a prolific author. And I've written extensively for Nurture UK, the charity, very, very proud of my long association with them. And my focus has always been upon developing resources which are user-friendly, very practical for practitioners in schools and in social care contexts, children's homes, etc., to develop and support the well-being of our children and young people. I also have a long and very prolific association with Sarah Miles, the wonderful Sarah Miles at Hinton House Publishers. So these are just a few of the publications which I'm very, very proud of. Been able to collaborate with lots of wonderful psychologists and former students of mine at the University of East London. So very, very proud of those publications. I will possibly make some reference to them in today's session, in that I'm going to talk about being solution focused and building positive thinking habits in particular in terms of how we approach our work and reflect upon it. So the key aims for today's session: I'm going to highlight for you the importance of reflective practice for all of us, in whichever area or arena we work in, whether that's as a psychologist, whether that's as a teacher, a TA, an ELSA in a school, or a social worker. I'm going to define this process of reflection and highlight some of the barriers that we may have ourselves to this process. I will present the key psychological models that I'll make reference to here that underpin reflection. And I'll present some key user-friendly methods, things that you can do quite easily straight away at the end of this session. You can take away from this session to really develop your skills in this whole area. I'm going to encourage you to trial key approaches, including specifically the learning journal that I'm going to present today. So how do we define reflection? We learn through critical reflection by putting ourselves into the experience and exploring personal and theoretical knowledge to understand and view it in different ways. And this is from a very seminal publication, The Development of Critical Reflection in the Health Professions. So do make reference to that if you would like to delve into this topic in more depth. At the end of the presentation, there are 3 slides, and I have referenced all of the resources that I've made reference to today, because there will be some of you I know who will really want to move forward with this and perhaps make use of this in terms of actually building up your skills and knowledge base. Reflection is important to us because as human beings, we need to be able to go back and think, to recapture experiences that we've had, and we'll mull over them, sometimes not in a healthy way, which is why I'm going to give you some structures today to make sure that it's not about mulling in a negative way. It's mulling in a way that enables us to evaluate things and also think about how we might change things or do things differently in the future, what we've learned from something. It's really, really important that reflection, working with experience, it's important in terms of learning. So we're working with our experiences to reflect upon them in order to improve our ability to learn from them. Very often our reflections will take the form of a written account. And definitely it's about exploring or examining ourselves and our actions. It's about thinking about how we act in the world, how we respond, and how we respond emotionally as well. I think it's important because we're trying to think about maybe theories that are underpinning the way that we think and the way that we operate, and we're thinking about how we react in certain contexts. But I think it's important that even though we're dealing with feelings, reactions and emotions in this process, that the whole point of this is to try and be able to stand back from that and take a kind of helicopter view of how we responded, what was going on, so we can recognise the emotion, but we can also be very rational about it, because what we're aiming to do ultimately is to develop a real understanding so that we can move forwards, that we can become better at what we do. So in essence, we have an experience, we reflect upon it, and that generates our ability to take action so that the next time we have a similar experience, we have learnt from the previous one, and we can think about how we can apply our knowledge, we can apply our theoretical understanding in that situation in the future. So this is a useful little visual, I think, to just give us an idea as to how this process works in practice. So there'll be this sense that we will collect information. So we'll identify an issue or a topic, we'll gather evidence, we'll talk to people, we will talk to different people in situations. If I'm trying to assess a child, for example, I want to get a wider view of the systems around that child, the way in which that child functions within them. I'll then think about what is happening. I will develop a question or a hypothesis, possibly. What's happening? How? Why? When? Who benefits from this situation? Who's disadvantaged? What could be improved? Because I will then be reflecting upon the information that I've gathered. Based upon that, the next stage will be that I will make a plan based on what I've learned, and I'll decide whether a change is necessary. Again, I'll reflect on that. I will then go and actually deliver on that plan. I will put it into action, and then I will change or modify my practice and again reflect. Then there'll be the process of review. Okay, monitoring the changes I've made, rethinking or taking new actions if necessary. What happened? Why? Did I achieve my objectives? Did I meet my goals? What did I learn in this process? And how could I use those insights to inform my practice next time as I gather information once again? What is it I need to know in addition to what I knew already? So you can see this whole cyclical process. So there are a range of contexts and purposes that we might be using in terms of actually engaging in reflective practice. We might be thinking about a specific lesson we've taught or a specific procedure we've carried out, if we've done an assessment on a child, if we work with a child therapeutically. There might be something longer, so a longer term project or group work or course or client practitioner relationship, the relationship I might have therapeutically, for example, with one of my supervisees. It may be a critical incident, something that's positive or negative that we need to actually focus on and think about and reflect upon. So basically that would result in our own development, in essence, skills, strengths, challenges. This is also for both education or work purposes. So reflective practitioners, the whole process of reflection for me is not just for people in education or to educate ourselves, it's also to benefit our work, the way in which we engage in our work, the way in which we develop professionally so that we can do the best possible job for the clients that we work with. So there is a real genuine rationale and purpose here, and a real reason, I suppose, that we need to be more reflective if we are going to continually develop. And I'm a great believer in lifelong learning and reflection on a daily basis. And again, as I said earlier, it's not about mulling about the things that went wrong and mulling on those and getting stressed about them and getting into kind of negative patterns of thought or thinking. It's about actually reflecting with a purpose to actually make a difference, to improve. However, well aware of the fact that there are a number of barriers that some of us may meet in terms of actually trying to engage in more reflective practice. For many today in education and psychology contexts, I would suggest that there are some time constraints, particularly in education here, that prevent us. Very often people will say, I don't have time to, mull on things myself. I don't have time to reflect. I'm so busy and there's so much to do. Sometimes I think we need to just really take a step back, because it's very, very important to recognise that if there is no time, then we've got to think about why that is the case, and that takes some reflection. We keep doing the same old thing, we'll get the same old thing, is my mantra. I often say that to people and they say I'm too busy to do this, but that is an issue, and I know that the reality on the ground in schools in particular is that people are very pressured. There is also this striving for certainty all the time that stops us from engaging in reflection, because very often we don't always come up with a one-size-fits-all solution. We can't actually have the answer to a problem. We may have to reflect and mull over something for many, many months sometimes before we get to any level of certainty. Also, this notion of evidence-based practice, again, thinking about making sure that things that we do are based on sound psychological evidence and research. And I think that that can also be an issue. But I would factor into my thinking here that sometimes we have to think about practice-based evidence. And I think that that is something that maybe we need to reflect on a wee bit more, that, you know, we actually are engaged in our practice, and what was the evidence from our practice sometimes, because I think we can underestimate the value of that. Also, I think sometimes that reflective practice, thinking about why we're doing what we're doing, is quite demanding emotionally, because you can get this kind of crisis of confidence if you stop and think about something and think, you know, actually that didn't really go that well. So I've got to actually be very honest and authentic in my reflections, and that can be quite painful, because sometimes we've got to put our hands up and say, do you know, I totally messed that up, I got it wrong. There's strength in that, but I can see that it's difficult when you are feeling very emotional. Organisational constraints. Again, I did a session in this series on peer group supervision, and I think reflective practice fits so well into that model, because reflective practitioners will be able to engage in peer group supervision much more effectively. But again, how does your organisation set this up for you? Is it supportive? Are your senior leadership team engaging themselves in reflective practice and supervision sessions? So I think this is all ties in very neatly with that, and the need to see at an organisational level that the senior leadership team in particular are buying into this. And also the clarity about reflective practice. What is it really what's really happening here? Is it just about navel gazing? Is it just about keeping a diary? Or do we need structure? Do we need to be very clear about the purpose of it? And sometimes I think that people aren't particularly clear, and that really does create a barrier to engaging in the process. So Sean talks about this process as being a way of reviewing what we're doing to inform our learning. It's active, it's persistent, and it's careful consideration of any belief or supposed form of knowledge. So active, persistent, and careful consideration of what we believe. That's really, really important, because sometimes our beliefs do need more reflection, particularly when they are perhaps maladjusted belief sets, or when they're erroneous, when they're in error. It's a mental process of trying to restructure our existing knowledge and insights, and I'll come back to that. So what does a reflective practitioner actually look like? What are their characteristics? I think that they are able to challenge their beliefs and values, and they'll think about assumptions that they've made, and that they will really reflect on those in a way that is challenging, in a meticulous way. They recognise the social construction of beliefs and practice as well, and I think that's really, really important, how we get to believe what we do and how those things are constructed. And sometimes, again, the constructions can be unhelpful to us. They've also got the ability, I think, to imagine in a different way. The common phrase that we hear all the time, it's a bit hackneyed, is think outside the box. They can think more creatively. So there's a level of creativity about this process. And someone who is a reflective practitioner, I would say usually when they are very effective as a reflective practitioner, they are very creative too. And also reflective skepticism. And this isn't about being negative. This is about challenging or suspending existing knowledge or beliefs. So actually thinking about, is that really useful? Is that really healthy? Very, very useful element of a reflective practitioner. So key components of critically reflective practice. Rethinking or deconstructing power. Very, very important. Where does that power come from? Is this okay? Is it right? Is it wrong? Is it something that is benefiting everyone? Is it benefiting one group or another group? Awareness of values and implications for practice. Again, if I reflect on this, if I have this belief set, how does that impact on my practice? Exploring emotions, emotional intelligence, again, is a key component of being critically reflective. Drawing on knowledge, developing knowledge, and practicing wisdom. I think that one of the key purposes for me about critical reflective practice is that we want to practice wisdom. We want to gain knowledge and practice wisdom in everything that we do. and being self-aware, being aware as to why I'm responding in the way I am, where that comes from, reflecting upon my own experiences, my own crisis, my own upbringing, etc. Creating uncertainty through dynamic questioning, so this willingness to live with a level of uncertainty, again, accepting the fact that sometimes we will not always get the one single answer, because very often there isn't one single answer that is right. It's much more complex than that, and we need to be able to negotiate and live with that level of uncertainty. Sean talks about reflection in action, reflection on action, and reflection for action. He argued that reflection could help professionals to develop their practice, and he saw practitioners as encountering many problems. He called them grey areas and uncertainties in their work. And he used this really lovely evocative phrase called swampy lowlands to describe those areas. And I would think, and I'd suggest, that those in education, social services, psychological services, all of us can sometimes be surrounded by these swampy lowlands on all sides. And what he suggested was that professional practice could be developed through a spiral of action and reflection, where the practitioner acts, reflects on the action, and then plans new action, which is informed by the results of the reflection. And that spiral is, in essence, continuous. It can be interrupted and incomplete, and reflection will not, as I said earlier, always solve problems. It could even cause some problems. However, it does help bring these uncertainties to the surface, and it provides us with a means of looking for solutions, so being solution focused as opposed to problem focused. And this, in essence, is the basis of critical reflection, which forms an important part of reflective practice. So reflection results in learning through changing ideas and your understanding of the specific situation. And it's an active process of learning, and it's more than thinking or thoughtful action. I think this is important. It involves problematizing teaching by recognizing that practice is not without dilemmas and issues. So it's not a linear process either. It's a cyclical one, as I said earlier, where reflection leads to the development of new ideas, which are then used to plan the next stages of learning. And this is why it's so important for us in terms of our professional development. It encourages us to look at issues from many different perspectives. And again, that helps us to understand the issue and scrutinise more deeply our own values, assumptions, and perspectives. So when the term critical reflection is used, in essence, it refers to a combination of the analytical, questioning or critical thinking, and reflective approaches, so all three. And it's that combination that I would suggest would characterise a critically reflective conversation. So how can we support our colleagues, ourselves, our students, children, young people to become more reflective? I think it's important that we help them to find a model of reflective practice which they're comfortable with. And again, one size doesn't fit all. Remember, this is going to vary for each of us as individuals. We need to enable them to understand the need for critical friendships. And that's really, really important, being critical friends. So when I had EPs on placement, on practice placements, when I was a tutor at the University of East London, we would very often ask them to become critical friends to each other. And that's a really, really positive message to give them as part of the process of engaging in critical reflection. So developing awareness of what is impacting on their reflection as well. What is it? Are there factors here that are interrupting this, are disturbing me, are barriers to my ability to reflect appropriately? And making sure that we don't avoid the questions. So it's really, really important, but also not delaying actions either. So making sure that we actually tackle, we raise those questions, we develop our ability to be brave and think about how we're going to act on them. And I think this notion of a critical friend is really, really valuable. As a psychologist, I am very, very used to engaging in critical conversations with my wonderful critical colleagues. And I think this is really, really important because it helps me to reflect. It helps me to challenge myself, to think about my mindset, my value systems, where it comes from. And sometimes that is really useful in terms of actually identifying and analysing some of my own barriers, some of my own blocks. And we do all have roadblocks at some point in our lives. And it's really, really useful to have critical friends who will help us to process this and think about this. And also there's power in the group, there's power in our peers, because there's a limit to what any of us can do on our own. And those critical friends really do help to shape and frame our reflection. So now I'm going to go through a few ways of reflecting that you can use right now. And I love this one, key moments. So this is just very, very simple. You might want to use these headings just to have a little go at thinking initially, if you've not done any reflection like this before, or it wasn't part of your initial training in whichever profession. I would be amazed if it wasn't, teaching and psychology certainly. We always keep a reflective journal, particularly in the first year. I actually have still kept mine. I don't do it every day anymore, but I do reflection. Perhaps I would suggest maybe about every 7 to 10 days I engage in a reflective process. And this key moments one is a very simple one. What were the hair-raising moments? What were the moments that made me think, wow, or shocked me? I wasn't expecting that. What gave me goosebumps? What were the heartwarming ones? What went well? What made me feel good about my work or practice? What was I really proud of? And I think that's an important one. It's a bit like, identifying what really went well today. And I do that at the end of every day. Toe curling moments. Oh my goodness, moments that made me feel really uncomfortable. What was going on there? The moments when I would look back years ago and think, why did I do that? That was so awful. My goodness me. But very often those are the ones that we really learn from the most. So very, very important to not just kind of bury those. And tummy sinking moments. What are the moments when you think, it just didn't go as you'd hoped? And what, if anything, gave you that sinking feeling, that horrible, negative, horrible feeling in the bottom of your tummy? What might you do next time differently to avoid that? I call this one the roller coaster. So before you're getting on the ride, what are you expecting? Do you have any apprehensions during the ride? How does it feel? Do you want to get off? Why? After it, how do you feel now? What was it like? And power. Who put you on that ride? Did you have any choices in what you did there? Did you have any choice in how you delivered that aspect of your service to your client group? Or did you have any power over that lesson or that area in the curriculum? Was that something that you took part in planning? And the weather model, I love this. Sunshine, key headings, just jot them down. What went well? What felt good? Rain, what didn't go so well? Lightning, what came as a shock? Or fog, where did you get lost? What couldn't you see? Why? So a lovely way, and I've used this with a lot with younger students, okay, in school context, particularly when we're talking about giving presentations and presentation skills. And the cake model. Preparation, what ingredients have you got? What recipe are you using? How are you feeling about making the cake? Okay, so obviously it's an analogy. Making the cake, did you follow the recipe? Did you add any spice? Did you do something slightly different in that lesson? Did you think in the moment and just engage very quickly with someone and respond in a really authentic way that was very spontaneous? Did you make a mess? If so, how did you tidy it up? And digesting the cake. Did you burn your fingers? Did you share it? Did it sink or did it rise? What did it taste like? If you changed the ingredients, would it have tasted better or the same? Did you cater for all tests, i.e. did you differentiate that lesson in the right way so that every single learner was really, really engaged? They felt that they could actually undertake the tasks presented. What was the icing on the cake? What was the best possible bit about it? So alongside my fun models, I'm now going to present you with some of the more traditional ones, the psychological ones. Not that I don't think that the fun models are underpinned by psychology, I most certainly do. So the Gibbs reflective cycle model, this is from 1988, so it's a long time ago, but this still underpins much of the reflective process that my psychology teams have engaged with over the years. And this reflective cycle was inspired partly by Kolb's learning cycle, and it enables us to focus especially on our own and others' feelings, views and perceptions. In common terms, what people would generally call this is the standing or walking in someone else's shoes. So standing or walking in someone else's shoes. So that relates obviously strongly to ideas about empathy. What's it like in your shoes? And the process is essentially, as ever, a cycle or a loop which contains these key elements. So description, what actually happened, the feelings, what were you thinking, what were you feeling at that time in that process, evaluation, what was good and bad about that particular experience, then analysis, what sense can you make of it? And that's what the analytical bit is, to actually say, what sense did you make or could you make of this situation? In the conclusion, you'd be thinking, well, what else could you have also done? And then the action plan. If this particular situation arose again, what would you do? What would be your plan? What would you do differently? What would be your new plan for that particular situation? So this basically is just a visual showing you that cyclical process of Gibbs' reflective cycle, just to make it very straightforward. And another one comes from Baltra. This was 1970, so a very long time ago now. What, so what, and now what? So what was going on? So what? What does that tell us? And now what? Now what shall we do next? So very, very simple underpinning. So the what element here for Baltra is what happened? What did I do? What did others do? What was I trying to achieve? What was actually achieved? Then the so what. So what is the importance of this? So what more do I need to know? So what have I actually learned? And then the now what? Now what do I need to do? Now what different options have I got? Now what will be the consequences? So a very, very useful, simple framework to answer those particular questions. What, so what, now what? And then Bood, Keogh and Walker's reflection model. So an individual recaptures their experience, they think about it, they mull it over perhaps with others, and I think that's really, really powerful. Think of peer group supervision. They then evaluate it and they act on the reflection. So our experiences ultimately, and so just a wee summary here, we have those behaviours, we have ideas, we have feelings associated with them. Those are our experiences. We return to that in the reflective process, and what we want to do is try and use the positive feelings and remove the obstructing ones. So we're re-evaluating the experience and recognising what actually engendered some of those obstructing feelings, and we need to actually then be able to move forward because we have gained new perspectives on the experience. We can change our behaviour, we can learn and think about how we might apply our new learning in another situation and commit to that action. Jan Fuchs' model is very interesting as well, talking about telling of the narrative, so describing the practice, and we're going to obviously come on to the journaling in a wee bit here. Deconstruction is about reflective questioning, exploring it and focusing on the power dynamics, and then reconstruction, the third element of this, is about planning future practice and putting those plans into action, but again focusing on the power dynamic. I mentioned Kolb earlier in terms of Gibbs' model, but this is Kolb's experiential learning model. It talks about concrete experience, so what was the event, and then reflective observation, observing myself in action. What are my thoughts and personal feelings about the experience? Abstract conceptualization, how can I draw on previous experiences and my knowledge to help me make sense of it? What is it that I've learned? What is it that I know from previous experience and my knowledge base, particularly of psychology? And then active experimentation. So if this event were to occur again, what would you do differently? What additional knowledge would you need to gain at this moment in time? And Williamson Rutter 2007 model is based on Gibbs again. So here the key headings: description, what happened; feelings, what were you thinking and feeling; evaluation, what was good and bad about this experience; and then an analysis, what sense can you make of the situation; conclusion, what else could you have done; and then your action plan, what was learnt, and if it arose again, what would you do? What would you do differently? What would your plan be? So we've looked at the underpinnings, we've looked at the models. What I would like to do now is to actually just present you with some activities that you can try out. Now, I'm well aware that you're probably listening to this hopefully with a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, and you might want to kind of pause when we get to certain slides, and I'll let you know when, so that you might want to begin to have a go, particularly if you're doing this as part of a wee mini CPD session with colleagues. I'm going to present you with some activities, some reflection activities that you can try out. Narratives, focus free writing, reflective journal, reflective writing assignments, critical incident recording, and a critical analysis stroke evaluation. So the slides will explain them, but we're going to actually have a go at doing one of these, hopefully. So narratives. A narrative is essentially a story of an experience or event, and it's written in the first person. So I felt, I thought, I did this, etc. It really is something that's learner-centered because it allows the learner's voice to be heard. It's your voice, and it enables links to be made between your personal and professional development. Now, when I engage in my own process of my reflective journal, I do actually use the first person, and I think this is really, really important because then that's something that I can share in supervision in order to allow for deeper reflection and comparison, and it enables me to really think and allow my critical friend to support me in that process of reflection. So it's at this point that you may want to stop the presentation and have a go at this focused free write. And this technique is really useful for helping you to start to think really freely about something. So you start from the incident, experience or process that you want to reflect on. So identify something that maybe you had a concern about or that went really well, for example, but just something recently. It might be a particular lesson or experience that you've had in terms of teaching. And just write for 5 to 15 minutes without stopping, just following your train of thought. So totally free writing, but this is focused on that one particular event or activity. So don't worry about your spelling, punctuation, anything else like that, doesn't matter. And if you wander off the topic, don't worry again, just bring yourself gently back. So when your time is up, then what you do is just skim through it for any useful words, get a highlighter pen and just highlight those words. And then sit and think, share this with friends, share this with someone if you have got the capacity to do that, or that there's potential for that at this current time. If not, share it later. But just highlight those things that just stick out from the page. You think, wow, yeah, you begin to find words, and maybe there's going to be a theme that will come from this. So reflective journals. Reflective journals really focus on your reactions to an event or experience and different ways you might look at it, how your experience links with other experiences, and how you understand it also in the light of theory. And this is really, really important from a psychological perspective. You want to be thinking how you are applying those theories in your work, in your practice. What you've learnt, what you need to learn. That's the whole purpose from my perspective. What is it you need to learn from this, and how might you achieve your identified learning goals? So this is one way of doing it. So you write the descriptions, you see things now. You include how you feel. You note down anything that you might want to refer to as evidence. Okay, so separating your feelings and from the actual evidence, what really happened, what you saw, what other people saw or may have seen. And you note questions or things you might want to explore if they occur to you. Then the later reflection on that journal is that you will look back objectively at what you've written. Okay, so you've included your emotions at the time, but you look back objectively and compare you now with then. Okay, have there been any changes since you wrote that? Have you been doing something differently as a result of reflecting on that situation at the current time? Then ask and answer critical questions, so relating it to the wider context and finding the justification for what you're saying now. Learning and moving forward then is what happens in terms of later reflection on that journal. Reflective writing assignments, another means of engaging in reflection, in the process of reflection, and this might use a specific model so that you have a defined structure, and this does help, I think, particularly when I'm doing this with younger teenagers in particular. So descriptive, who, what, where, when, those headings. Analytical, interpretive, why, how, so. And looking forward again, where, what now, and I'm referring then back to Baltra on the earlier slide, or possibly more complex using Gibbs' whole cycle. But those three key elements there, so basic phases, are what I would suggest you would use in reflective writing assignments. And a critical incident. So it's an incident that in some way was really significant to you. So you recount that, what the situation was, what you did in it, what happened as a result of your actions, and then a reflection on that specific situation and event and how it unfolded. So the analysis of that, the critical analysis stroke evaluation, was really when you're aiming for a deeper understanding. So you'd break it down into constituent parts. You'd identify positives, negatives, and any issues. Then you'd identify and challenge any assumptions that you made from yourself and assumptions that others may have made. You'd make connections as well with other experiences and learning, and possibly relate those to external sources such as theory, research, specific case studies that you've looked at, and wider social, political, economic context as well, clearly. So that critical analysis really gives us a deeper understanding. So again, just to really highlight this and reinforce the message, the importance of reflection, it's absolutely vital for us, I think, because unless we make these conscious and systematic efforts to critique our own practice, we're going to be very much less aware as to how and when we're being discriminatory, when we're engaging in practice that basically does not allow us to reflect in a way that it purposefully changes what we do. Okay, we need to be very, very clear about this. If we are going to engage in conscious and systematic efforts to critique our own practice, we will be less discriminatory because we will be reflecting upon our behaviours in our work context, in our interactions with others. If we don't do this, we won't make use of the knowledge base that we've developed in our own professions, and that's essential too. We will continue to repeat the same mistakes. As I said earlier, in a very hackneyed phrase, we will keep on doing the same old things. So we'll keep on getting the same old things. And I talk to people a lot about behaviour change in my work. And very often people will say, oh, well, you're a psychologist. You've got time to kind of reflect and think about things. And I'm saying, no, this should be part of what every human being does. If we want to make our lives more fulfilling, more meaningful, we have to reflect on ourselves in action, what we're doing, why we're doing what we're doing. Because if we want to change things and make things better for ourselves and others, we need to reflect in order to identify where we're going wrong, and also to identify what we've learnt from our experiences. If we don't do this, our skills will not develop, we will not develop as practitioners, we will just simply stagnate. So it's the importance of reflection, I can't stress it strongly enough. So Hatton and Smith identified 4 levels of this reflection as being descriptive writing, so a straightforward account, which I've asked you to do today. Descriptive reflection, so this is an account with reasons, justifications, and an explanation for the events. Dialogic reflection, and this is when you begin to stand back from the account, almost having that helicopter view and really analysing what was going on, why things were happening, why we did what we did. And critical reflection, obviously the writer then puts their account into a broader perspective. Goodman's 3 levels, often referred to, roughly equate to the following. So largely descriptive, so looking at practical things in terms of responsibility, accountability, efficiency, how well you did something, how well that went. Moving out from your particular experiences, so your relationship between theory and practice, the broader implications, issues and values. And then level 3, broadening it out to consider the implications in context, ethical, social, political influences. So 3 levels of reflection. So a follow-on task for you today from this session, if you are interested and you really can see the value in this, is to use the learning journal questions that are on this next slide to begin your reflective journal. If you don't do this already, just have a go for, maybe a whole week, and then just reflect upon the process at the end of the week and see if this is something you think actually you could factor this into your daily routine. Consider how you might develop this over time and use it to inform your coaching, with other colleagues, your peer support systems, and your personal development sessions that you may have with line managers in the work context. And then share your thoughts on this process with a colleague. So I'm encouraging you to use the learning journal for a week and then come together as a group in some capacity and reflect upon this and see how maybe this could be something that you start to embed in your daily practice, but also within the systems in your work context. So these are my learning journal questions, and this will give you a framework to begin keeping your learning journal. So what happened? Describe the experience. How do I feel about it? So before, during and after. What insights have I gained from this experience, about myself, about others? What do I think helped or hindered my learning? So other people's learning, for example. And what will I do differently or the same because of this particular experience? So very simple. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 key headings here, 5 key questions. So use those to frame your actual responses you're recording in your first learning journal. So the next 3 slides, I've given you the references today. I think it's really important because I know that some of you will be coming at this if you're a trainee educational psychologist, for example, and you may want to actually look at some of these in more depth. So I've included all of these on the next 3 slides, so I'll just whiz through them. So just to flag up, if you are interested in developing peer support circles and systems and you want to embed this in your school or professional learning context, then do have a look at the Wellbeing Toolkit for Mental Health Leads from Hinton House. There is a whole module on peer circles and support systems, and I think it's a really useful set of resources for anyone at this current time, because I know that for example, money is very tight, particularly in education, and this is something that I think will probably give you a very good professional development whole program for over a year. I think you could probably make use of this, so just to flag that up. And finally, thank you very much for listening. I hope that this has been useful, and for many of you, you'll be able to take this away, actually engage in the process of reflection, and hopefully begin to see the real value of being and continuing to be a reflective practitioner.